So this is a combination of a 21st cryptocurrency system with a 19th century or 5th century BC, if you like, gold system. You're combining the two, the oldest form of money and the newest form of money. Notice what's missing in everything I just described. No dollars. There's no dollar in that system. You know, I say to people, I do a lot of, I've lectured recently at the U.S. Army War College, and I say, you know, why do you send missiles and bombers and you know, various forms of attack and infantry, et cetera, to attack an enemy? Well, they say, well, we want to, you know, degrade their capabilities, destroy their infrastructure, take out their oil pipelines, their ports, et cetera. That's what you do in a war. So what if you could do all that with a flick of a switch? What if you could do it all by hacking into their financial system, shutting down their stock exchange, shutting down their banks, freezing accounts? You would achieve the same thing. You would degrade the financial capability of your opponent, but you wouldn't have to fire a shot. That's the world we live in today. Unfortunately, all of us, me and all of you, can be collateral damage when that starts to get out of control. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well.
What's the new system Jim Rickards talks about? It's a system where countries trade in a new currency and ditch the US dollar. Jim Rickards made this prediction years ago, but it gets more relevant today. With the current war that is going on, wars with S, the risk got bigger as more countries are taking sides against the United States. So what's the big deal about the new system? What will happen when the world stops using the US dollar? Will the US economy collapse? To really understand what's going on, we need to take a deep dive into the financial warfare. Jim Rickards is one of the masters of this new kind of war. At least there are two kinds of war. There's something called kinetic warfare where you send tanks, missiles, and bomber planes to your enemy. But there's also financial warfare where you hack the enemy's digital system, shutting down their banks, stock exchanges, payment systems, etc. Financial warfare is more deadly than kinetic warfare because there's no blood in the streets and people get depressed because they lose their money, all of it if they put all of their eggs in the digital basket. Financial warfare is not a new thing. In fact, it's been happening since the 19th century. Let's hear more from Jim.
Economic warfare, or financial warfare if you want to be more precise, is not completely new. There are a lot of new things about it that I'm going to talk about, but it's actually been a part of warfare as far back as you want to go. And all three of these examples I've given you are financial warfare tactics, economic warfare tactics, in conjunction with kinetic warfare. So Napoleon had to actually invade Russia. He couldn't put on sanctions. And the British actually had to invade, blast their way into Hong Kong. And the Japanese actually had to attack Pearl Harbor. So the economic and what's called the kinetic, just things that shoot and explode, went hand in hand. Today we're in what I call a new age of financial warfare. You can actually have a financial war without any kinetic activity at all. You can bankrupt a country, you can engineer regime change. I've been involved in a few efforts along those lines. So I say my definition: degrade and defeat the capabilities of adversaries by non-kinetic means, not shooting, not invading, not firing missiles, using sanctions, capital markets, banking systems, exchanges, clearinghouses, payments, channels for cash, stocks, bonds, deposits, etc. These are weapons of war. Of course they're financial instruments, of course they're how we save and invest, but they can also be used to destabilize countries, and they are being used, and we'll point out some examples. Now, I'm not going to go through everything on this list in detail. Each one of these line items I could do a 2-hour lecture on, so we're not going to put anyone through that. But I want to make the point that there is a long list of statutes and regulations that empower the president to engage in financial warfare or to protect the national security of the United States. The first one, it's got a clunky name, International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, call it AIPA for short. This was enacted during the administration of President Carter. This actually gives the president dictatorial powers when national security is at stake. And that's not an exaggeration. By the way, in the Roman Republic, they had an office called dictator, and he wasn't a bad guy. It was an emergency empowerment of the leader. So normally you had a council or other figures of the Roman Republic, later the Roman Empire, who were elected. It wasn't widespread voter empowerment. It was only an elite that was allowed to vote. But it was a Republican form of government. There were elections, and people got chosen for these offices. But if they were being invaded, if they were at war, if there was an economic crisis, the Senate had the power to appoint a dictator. It was a 2-year term. but you just had extraordinary powers. You could do whatever you wanted. We have the same law today, and this is it. IEPA. When you read the postmortems on the 2008 financial crisis, you'll hear Ben Bernanke and Hank Paulson, who were Secretary of the Treasury, repeat ad nauseum, well, we really wanted to save Lehman Brothers, we didn't want it to go bankrupt, but we didn't have the statutory authority to do it. Nonsense. They did. Either their lawyers didn't tell them, or their lawyers are incompetent, which I doubt. I'm sure the lawyers knew all about this. Or they chose not to do it, which is okay, but don't blame it on the law. You have to take responsibility for your decision. But this law would have allowed the United States government to nationalize Lehman Brothers at the time, because the national security was at risk, because the world was in the midst of a major financial collapse. Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, this is how we got Bayer Aspirin. Bayer AG, the biggest German chemical company, they had a subsidiary in the United States. President Wilson just confiscated it during World War I under the Trading with the Enemy Act. Interesting footnote, in 1933, within weeks of taking office, President Roosevelt issued an executive order confiscating all the gold in the United States, all the privately held gold in the United States. Well, what statutory authority did President Roosevelt use to issue that executive order? You can't just do it for fun. He used the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917. Now, I don't know who the enemy was. It was probably us, like the American people, but that's what he used. Anyway, there's a long list here. Skipping one, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS. I did a lot of work for the intelligence community over many years in CFIUS. When you say CFIUS, people say, does it itch or burn? But it's an acronym for this committee. This is an interagency committee composed of cabinet officers or their deputies that can reject foreign acquisitions of U.S. companies on national security grounds. Now, when I was doing it, mostly during the Obama administration, the government really leaned over backwards to let deals go forward. I mean, I was working with the CIA, and we did the intelligence. We didn't have any decision-making authority. It was our job to point out the threats, like, oh, the People's Liberation Army controls Huawei, which is the largest Chinese telecommunications company. But we would report on the threats, but it was up to the Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Commerce, and a few others as to whether the deals were going to go through. And they would more often than not come back and say, look, can we mitigate this? Can we let the deal go through, but have what they call a mitigation agreement that says the Chinese guy can't be on the board of directors, or he can't, et cetera. And you'd find ways to do that. Anyway, the Patriot Act you're familiar with, SWIFT, Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. You all know, like, sort of where the brain meets the spinal cord. That's a really sensitive part of the human neurosystem. SWIFT is the brain and the spinal cord of the international financial system. SWIFT is a message traffic provider where all the major transactions between all the major banks in the world are processed. If there's a central nervous system for the global banking system, it's SWIFT. It's based in Belgium, and when Deutsche Bank sends $5 billion to Citibank, or Bank of America sends $10 billion to Banco Santander, it all goes through SWIFT. If you think of it as a choke point, it's the Straits of Hormuz. You know, half the world's oil goes through the Straits of Hormuz. Far more than half the world's financial transactions go through SWIFT. If you cut off that choke point, you're going to have serious consequences. I'll come back to that because we're using this today. But my point is, when you have a financial crisis or a financial confrontation, or you're in a financial war, the White House does not have to run to Congress and say, please, please give me some powers. The president has these powers. And Trump has shown more willingness to use them than any president, well, probably ever, but some have used it more than others, but Trump's using it extensively. So he has weaponized these financial tools.
Jim Rickards has explained the tools and regulations that can be used in a financial warfare. Back then these tools were used together with kinetic warfare. But today financial warfare can be conducted without firing a single shot, or totally non-kinetic. Since everything is digital today and we have more advanced technology, the financial war got easier and also more deadly. With a bunch of hackers, billions of dollars can be frozen or even stolen by the enemies. And some of these stolen dollars could be your retirement, your money in the stock exchanges, your savings in your bank account, etc. In the next segment, Jim Rickards will explain what's new about financial warfare, including the 5 steps of financial warfare. Without further ado, let's get into it.
A couple points about financial warfare. In the 21st century, just to distinguish it from the 19th century examples I gave, or 20th century examples. And I mentioned this already, financial war can be completely non-kinetic. In other words, you can fight a whole war through the financial system without firing a shot, and it can be just as devastating to the wealth of your adversary. Cyber financial warfare is what the military calls a force multiplier. A force multiplier is you've got a main body, or whatever. It's an infantry division, it's an aircraft carrier task force, or whatever it is. But you bring something else into play that makes it twice as strong or twice as effective. Whether that's an amphibious landing, or you can cut off telecommunications. These things are called force multipliers because they make your force even stronger. Financial warfare can be a force multiplier, or it can be used in conjunction with other events that are going on. So if you're China and you want to launch a financial attack on the United States, are you going to do it on a day when the Dow Jones is up 800 points, or a day when it's down 800 points? Because sometimes it goes down 800 points on its own. Obviously, the Chinese are going to wait for a day when things are bad already on its own and launch the attack then, and there's your force multiplier, because you're piling on an already weak and vulnerable system and you're destroying confidence. And then the final point I make is that financial warfare can be decisive. It's no longer just an add-on or a collateral feature of a kinetic war. You can actually destabilize countries, achieve regime change, shut down governments you don't like, and again, I'll return to that. So here's something I put together for the Army. I said, man, so I created the spectrum from ultraviolet to infrared. So over on the left side of your screen are what I would call normal commercial activities. So, Alibaba competes against Google, or Ford competes against Volkswagen. It's normal trade, normal commerce, normal innovation. The next one, a little more over in the blue area. Now you get into cheating. So it's still economic competition as opposed to warfare, but you're dumping excess capacity. You're manipulating your currency. You're stealing intellectual property. So you're breaking the rules. It can still be labeled as economic competition, as I say. So then over in the middle, the green, now we're getting a little more aggressive. These are tariffs, trade sanctions, weaponized CFIUS. When the United States tells Huawei, the big Chinese telecommunications company, that they're not allowed to buy Qualcomm, is that trade or is that warfare? Well, you're getting closer to warfare, that's the point. And again, no shots are being fired, but that's more closer to that part of the spectrum. Out in the yellow, I've got de-swifting. De-swifting is one of those words you only hear in Washington, but what it means is I just kicked you out of SWIFT. That's like going into intensive care, finding a patient who needs the oxygen, turning off the oxygen. Not going to last too long. You cut off access to SWIFT, you cannot get hard currency in and out of your banking system. Doesn't matter if it's dollars, euros, yen, Swiss francs, pound sterling. You cannot transfer that money to your banking system because that SWIFT is how you do it. And then out on the right, this is clearly warfare, malicious cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, taking over order entry systems. When I first started doing this about 10 years ago, we warned that the Chinese had so much money